The ivory envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by hand to my downtown law office. My secretary Miranda placed it carefully on my mahogany desk, her eyebrows raised in curiosity. The expensive cardstock bore elegant calligraphy that I recognized immediately, the same flowing script that had once addressed our wedding invitations 5 years ago. Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Pierce request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, David Michael Pierce, to Miss Victoria Elizabeth Hartwell. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at the invitation for a long moment, my fingers tracing the embossed lettering. David was getting married to Victoria Hartwell, the 24-year-old marketing coordinator who had been interning at his law firm when our marriage imploded. The same Victoria who had been sending him late-night work texts during our couples therapy sessions. The same Victoria who had conveniently been available to comfort him during our trial separation. "Everything all right, Elena?" Miranda asked, lingering in the doorway of my corner office. She'd been with me since I opened my practice 3 years ago, and her maternal instincts were finely tuned to my moods. "Just an old friend getting married," I replied, sliding the invitation into my desk drawer. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. David Pierce was many things, but a friend wasn't one of them. Not anymore. I turned my attention back to the Henderson custody case files spread across my desk, but my mind kept drifting to that elegant invitation. The audacity was breathtaking. After everything that had happened, the lies, the gaslighting, the complete abandonment of his responsibilities, David had the nerve to invite me to watch him marry his mistress. My phone buzzed with a text from my nanny, Sophia. "The triplets are asking when Daddy is coming home again. What should I tell them?" I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. Emma, Ethan, and Evan were 4 years old now, born just 18 months into our marriage. When David was still pretending to be excited about becoming a father. They had his dark hair and stubborn chin, but thankfully, my green eyes and sense of determination. "Tell them Daddy is busy with work," I texted back. It wasn't entirely a lie. David was busy building a new life that didn't include the children he'd helped create. The irony wasn't lost on me. As one of Chicago's most successful family law attorneys, I spent my days fighting for children's rights, ensuring they received support from absent parents, advocating for their best interests in custody battles. Yet my own children's father had managed to disappear into legal loopholes and technicalities that I knew all too well. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Our divorce had been finalized 2 years ago, but David had successfully argued for minimal visitation rights, claiming his demanding career as a corporate attorney made consistent parenting impossible. The judge, an old boys network relic named Harold Morrison, had been sympathetic to David's argument that his 60-hour work weeks were necessary to pay the substantial child support I was awarded. What Judge Morrison didn't know was that David had been systematically hiding assets for months before filing for divorce. What he didn't know was that David's law firm, Pierce & Associates, was actually owned by a complex web of shell companies that made his true net worth nearly impossible to calculate. What he didn't know was that David had spent our last year of marriage quietly moving money offshore while telling me we needed to tighten our belts for the children's future, but I knew. I'd known for a long time. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Marcus Chen answered on the second ring. "Elena Rodriguez. It's been too long." Marcus's voice carried the warmth of an old friendship and the sharpness of a brilliant investigative mind. We'd worked together on several high-profile cases, and his forensic accounting skills were legendary. "Marcus, I need a favor. A big one. This wouldn't have anything to do with your charming ex-husband, would it?" I smiled despite myself. Marcus had been the one to uncover the first traces of David's financial manipulation during our divorce proceedings. Unfortunately, we discovered it too late to use in court without triggering a lengthy appeals process that I couldn't afford, emotionally or financially. "He's getting married next month. To Victoria Hartwell." Marcus whistled low. "The intern? That was fast. I need to know everything about their finances, Marcus. Every account, every asset, every hidden investment. Money trails, property transfers. Business partnerships, everything. Elena, Marcus's voice carried a note of caution. What exactly are you planning? I stood up and walked to my office window, looking down at the busy Chicago street below. Somewhere in this city, David was probably having lunch with his fiancée, planning their honeymoon to Tuscany while his children ate peanut butter sandwiches because their mother was working 18-hour days to keep up with the mortgage and childcare costs. I'm planning to give my children what they deserve, I said finally. Their father's support, their father's presence, and their father's acknowledgement that they exist. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the framed photo on my desk. It showed me with Emma, Ethan, and Evan at Navy Pier last summer, all of us laughing as Emma tried to balance a too large ice cream cone. They looked so happy, so complete. They had no idea that other children had fathers who came to soccer games and read bedtime stories and remembered their birthdays. David had missed all 3 of their 4th birthday parties last month. He'd sent expensive gifts, a robotics kit for Ethan, an art easel for Emma, a junior chemistry set for Evan, but no personal note, no phone call, no appearance. The children had asked why Daddy wasn't there, and I'd run out of creative excuses. That evening, I drove home to our townhouse in Lincoln Park. It was smaller than the mansion David and I had shared in Winnetka, but it was ours. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every toy scattered across the living room floor represented the life I'd built for my children after their father decided they weren't worth his time. Mommy. 3 small bodies crashed into me as I walked through the front door, their energy and enthusiasm washing away the day's tension. This was what mattered. This was what I was fighting for. How were your days, my loves? I asked, settling onto the couch as they climbed into my lap. I drew you a picture of a butterfly, Emma announced, producing a colorful creation from her backpack. It's got purple wings like the one we saw at the zoo. I built a robot with blocks, Ethan added, pointing to an impressive Lego construction. In the corner. It can walk and everything. I made a volcano in science class, Evan chimed in, his eyes bright with excitement. It erupted and everything. I wanted to show Daddy, but his voice trailed off, and my heart clenched. Evan was the most like David, intellectually curious, scientifically minded, eager to share his discoveries. He was also the one who asked about his father most often. Daddy is very busy with work, sweetheart, I said, stroking his dark hair. But I'd love to hear about your volcano. As Evan launched into a detailed explanation of baking soda and vinegar reactions, I found myself making a decision. David Pierce wanted to pretend his children didn't exist? Fine. But he was about to learn that some things can't be ignored forever. Over dinner, homemade mac and cheese that had become our Tuesday tradition, I listened to my children chatter about their day. Emma was already showing signs of artistic talent, her drawings displaying an unusual attention to detail for a 4-year-old. Ethan had his father's analytical mind but with an emotional intelligence David had never possessed. And Evan? Evan had inherited David's love of complex systems and problem-solving, but with none of his father's selfish ruthlessness. They were extraordinary children, and David was missing all of it. By choice, after they were in bed, I sat in my home office, going through the Henderson files, but my mind kept returning to that wedding invitation. The date was set for Saturday, October 14th, at the Four Seasons Hotel. The reception would be in the grand ballroom, with dancing until midnight. I pulled out my laptop and began researching. Victoria Hartwell, 24, Northwestern graduate, marketing coordinator at Pierce & Associates. Her LinkedIn profile showed a rapid promotion trajectory that coincided suspiciously with her relationship with David. Her Instagram was filled with photos of expensive dinners, weekend trips to Napa Valley, and designer handbags that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her engagement announcement had run in both the Chicago Tribune and Town and Country magazine. The photos showed a radiant young woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, standing next to David in his perfectly tailored suit. He looked older than his 35 years, stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when we were married. The article mentioned that Victoria came from old Chicago money. The Hartwells owned a chain of boutique hotels across the Midwest. It also mentioned that the happy couple was planning to honeymoon in Tuscany before settling into their new home in Lincoln Park, 3 blocks from where his children lived. I closed the laptop and poured myself a glass of wine, settling into my favorite armchair with the legal files I'd brought home. But instead of reviewing custody agreements, I found myself planning. David thought he could compartmentalize his life, his successful career, his beautiful young wife, his elegant new lifestyle, while relegating his children to quarterly visits and impersonal gifts. He thought he could attend charity galas and country club events while his ex-wife struggled to pay for after-school care and soccer cleats. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The next morning, I called my assistant Miranda into my office. "I need you to clear my calendar for October 14th, I said. "And I need you to order me a new dress. Something elegant, appropriate for a wedding reception." Miranda's eyebrows rose. "The invitation you received yesterday? That's the one." I leaned back in my chair, already feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with preparing for a challenging case. "Also, I need you to make some calls. Find out which catering company is handling the reception, which photographer they've hired, and which band is playing." "Elena," Miranda said carefully, "what exactly are you planning?" I thought about Emma's drawing of a butterfly, Ethan's pride in his Lego robot, Evan's excitement about his volcano. I thought about 3 children. Who deserved better than absent father who treated them like inconvenient obligations? "I'm planning to remind David Pierce that some responsibilities can't be divorced," I said. "And I'm going to make sure the most important people in his life finally meet him." Miranda's expression shifted from concern to intrigue. "The children?" "The children," I confirmed. "After all, it's only proper that they meet their father's new wife. Don't you think?" As Miranda left to make the necessary arrangements, I pulled out the wedding invitation one more time. David had made a mistake inviting me. He'd forgotten that I wasn't just his ex-wife, I was also one of the most successful family law attorneys in Chicago. I knew how to research, how to plan, and how to execute a strategy with precision. More importantly, he'd forgotten that our children were his biological legacy, whether he acknowledged them or not. And sometimes, biological connections have a way of asserting themselves at the most inconvenient moments. I slipped the invitation back into my desk drawer and turned my attention to my computer. I had work to do, phone calls to make, and a reception to attend. David Pierce was about to discover that some ghosts from the past don't stay buried, and if Victoria Hartwell thought she was marrying a man with no baggage, she was about to get a very educational introduction to the truth. 3 weeks before the wedding, Marcus Chen's preliminary report landed on my desk like a roadmap to justice. I spread the documents across my conference table, each page revealing another layer of David's carefully constructed deception. "Your ex-husband is more creative than I gave him credit for," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from me. With his laptop open. "Pierce & Associates isn't just a law firm, it's the tip of an iceberg that would make the Titanic nervous." I studied the financial flowcharts he'd prepared, tracing the complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. "Walk me through it." "David's been planning this for years, probably since before your marriage started falling apart." Marcus pulled up a detailed timeline on his screen. In 2019, he established Pierce Holdings in Delaware. In 2020, that company acquired a 60% stake in Pierce & Associates, effectively making him majority owner of his own firm while maintaining the appearance of being a junior partner. My jaw tightened. In 2020, David had convinced me to take out a second mortgage on our house to help with temporary cash flow issues at his firm. He'd shown me fabricated documents proving his reduced income, documents I now realized were complete fiction. Then, there's Hartwell Hospitality Group, Marcus continued, clicking to another screen. "Victoria's family business. Turns out they've been hemorrhaging money for the past 3 years. Hotel occupancy rates plummeted during the pandemic, and they never recovered. So she needs his money," I said, pieces clicking into place. "More than that. Look at this." Marcus showed me a series of property transfers. 6 months ago, David purchased the Hartwell flagship hotel in downtown Chicago through Pierce Holdings. Officially, he's their white knight investor. Unofficially, he now owns the majority stake in a company that's been in Victoria's family for 4 generations. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. David hadn't just found himself a young wife, he'd bought himself into Chicago's old money social circle. The Hartwell's financial desperation had given him something his legal career never could: instant pedigree and social status. "There's more," Marcus said, his tone darkening. The prenup Victoria signed is ironclad. If the marriage ends for any reason within the first 5 years, she loses everything: her stake in the family business, her trust fund, even her childhood home. David structured it so that divorce would leave her completely destitute. And the child support I'm supposed to be receiving? Marcus pulled up another document. Officially, David Pierce earns $180,000 per year as a junior partner at Pierce & Associates. The child support calculations are based on that figure. Unofficially, his various business interests generated over $2.3 million in income last year. I stood up and walked to my office window, watching the afternoon traffic crawl along Michigan Avenue. Below me, families rushed through their daily routines, parents picking up children from school, couples meeting for lunch, ordinary people living honest lives. Meanwhile, my ex-husband had spent years constructing an elaborate financial fortress designed to keep his own children from receiving adequate support. "Elena," Marcus said quietly, "there's something else. Something you need to see." I turned back to find him holding a thick manila folder. David's been documenting his interactions with the children. Every missed visit, every declined invitation, every birthday party he skipped. He's building a case. My blood ran cold. What kind of case? A custody case. He's preparing to argue that the children have been successfully alienated from him, that you've poisoned their relationship, and that supervised visitation should be reduced to quarterly meetings. Marcus's expression was grim. He's planning to use their lack of attachment to him as evidence that they're better off without regular contact. I sank back into my chair, feeling the world shift beneath me. David wasn't just neglecting his children, he was systematically documenting that neglect to justify further abandonment. Every time Emma asked why Daddy didn't come to her art show, every time Ethan wondered why Daddy missed his soccer game, every time Evan called and got voicemail, David was building a legal argument that his absence was actually in their best interest. The sick part, Marcus continued, is that his strategy might work. Judge Morrison has already shown bias toward fathers with demanding careers. If David can prove the children aren't bonded to him, he could argue that disrupting his new marriage with increased visitation would be harmful to everyone involved. I thought about Victoria Hartwell, smiling in those engagement photos, planning her Tuscan honeymoon while my children wondered why their father had stopped loving them. Did she know about Emma, Ethan, and Evan? Had David told her he had 3 children, or were we just an inconvenient detail he preferred to omit? "I need to know everything about the wedding," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "Guest list, seating arrangements, photography schedule, reception, timeline, everything." Over the next 2 weeks, I assembled a dossier that would have impressed the FBI. Miranda's connections in Chicago's event planning community proved invaluable. The Four Seasons catering manager was a former client whose custody case I'd won 3 years ago. The photographer was married to a paralegal at a competing firm who owed me a favor. The wedding planner's assistant was the sister of one of my regular clients. Everyone was happy to help Elena Rodriguez, the attorney who fought for children's rights, gather information for what they assumed was a generous surprise for the happy couple. 250 guests, Miranda reported, spreading the seating chart across my desk. Chicago's social elite, legal community heavy hitters, and both families. The Hartwell guest list reads like a who's who of old money Chicago. I studied the chart, noting the carefully orchestrated social hierarchy. The Pierce family table was positioned prominently near the head table, while the Hartwell relatives occupied equally prestigious spots. David's law colleagues had prime real estate, as did Victoria's sorority sisters and country club friends. Where would uninvited guests end up? I asked. Miranda consulted her notes. "Security will be minimal, this isn't a celebrity wedding. Gate crashers would probably be seated at overflow tables near the back, assuming they made it past the initial check-in." "And the children's area?" "No children's area. It's an adults-only celebration." The invitation specifically mentioned that. Of course it was. David had made sure his own children wouldn't accidentally encounter his new life even if someone had thought to invite them. I opened my laptop and pulled up the wedding's Instagram hashtag. Victoria had been documenting every detail of their engagement and wedding planning, the venue tours, dress fittings, cake tastings, even their couple's massage appointments. Her posts painted the picture of a fairy tale romance, complete with sunset proposals and surprise weekend getaways. What struck me most was how completely we were erased from their narrative. David appeared in Victoria's social media as a successful, unattached lawyer who had swept her off her feet. There were no mentions of previous marriages, no hints of complications, no acknowledgement that he'd ever had a life before her, but social media could be misleading. I needed to know what Victoria actually knew about David's children. "Miranda, I need you to arrange a consultation with Dr. Sarah Mitchell," I said, referring to Chicago's most sought-after child psychologist. "Tell her I need professional advice about introducing children to a parent's new partner." Dr. Mitchell's office was located in a renovated Victorian mansion in Lincoln Park, just a few blocks from David and Victoria's new home. Her waiting room was filled with family photos and children's artwork, creating an atmosphere of warmth and safety that felt like a rebuke to David's cold neglect. "Elena, it's good to see you again," Dr. Mitchell said, greeting me with a warm handshake. She'd provided expert testimony in several of my custody cases, and her reputation for putting children's needs first was unassailable. "I need your professional opinion about a delicate situation," I began, settling into her comfortable office. "If a father has been largely absent from his children's lives, and those children encounter him unexpectedly in a social setting, what might their reaction be?" Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "That depends on several factors. How old are the children? How long has the absence been? What kind of relationship existed before the absence?" 4-year-old triplets. Father has been mostly absent for 2 years, with only sporadic contact. Before that, he was present but emotionally distant. Children that age have complex feelings about absent parents, she explained. They often experience a mixture of excitement, confusion, and sometimes anger. They might run toward the parent, or they might hang back uncertainly. Much depends on how the absence has been explained to them. And if they encounter the parent with a new partner? Dr. Mitchell's expression grew more serious. That could be particularly confusing and potentially distressing. Children often harbor fantasies about their parents reuniting. Seeing a parent with someone new can shatter those hopes quite dramatically. What if the children were to call out to the father? Would that be normal? Absolutely. Children have no filter for social appropriateness when it comes to their emotional needs. If they saw their father across a crowded room, they might very well call out, "Daddy," regardless of the circumstances. She paused, studying my expression. "Elena, are you planning something?" I chose my words carefully. "I'm trying to understand what might happen if my children accidentally encountered their father at a public event." Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly. "Children deserve to have relationships with both parents when it's safe and appropriate. If their father has been avoiding them, an unexpected encounter might actually be beneficial. It could force him to confront the reality of his choices." After leaving Dr. Mitchell's office, I drove past David and Victoria's new house. It was a stunning Victorian mansion with a wraparound porch and carefully manicured gardens. The house that his children's support payments could have afforded, if he'd been honest about his income. A "just married" banner was already hanging on the front porch, and I could see wedding gifts stacked on tables through the front windows. Victoria's white BMW was parked in the driveway next to David's black Mercedes, both cars more expensive than my annual salary. My phone rang as I sat watching their perfect house. It was Sophia, my nanny. "Elena, I'm so sorry to bother you, but Evan is asking about the photo again." My heart sank. Evan had found an old wedding photo of David and me hidden in a box of Christmas decorations last month. In the picture, David was smiling as he held me close, looking every inch the devoted husband and future father. Evan had been carrying the photo around ever since, asking when Daddy was coming home. "What did you tell him?" I said Daddy lives somewhere else now, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love them. "But Elena, he's been crying. He wants to know if Daddy forgot about them." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. "I'll be home in 20 minutes. Tell him Mommy has a surprise planned." As I drove home, I thought about David's documentation strategy, his careful construction of evidence that his children were better off without him. He was counting on their natural adaptation to his absence, their childish resilience, their ability to stop asking for someone who never answered. But children don't forget their parents, even when those parents want to be forgotten. And sometimes, The most powerful testimony comes from the mouths of babes. That evening, I sat with Emma, Ethan, and Evan on the living room floor, surrounded by photo albums and memory boxes. I'd been putting this conversation off for months, but David's wedding had forced my hand. "I want to tell you about your daddy," I said, opening the album to a picture of David holding newborn Emma. In the photo, his expression was soft with wonder, his large hands gentle as he cradled his tiny daughter. "That's Daddy," Evan exclaimed, pointing at the picture. "He looks happy." "He was happy," I said honestly. "When you were born, Daddy was very excited to meet you." I showed them more pictures, David reading to baby Ethan, David teaching 6-month-old Emma to clap her hands, David's proud smile as 9-month-old Evan took his first steps. For a brief moment, David had tried to be the father they deserved. "Where did Daddy go?" Emma asked, her small finger tracing David's face in a photo. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they love," I said carefully. "Daddy chose to live a different life, but that doesn't mean you did anything wrong." "Can we see him?" Ethan asked. "Can we tell him about my robot and Emma's butterflies and Evan's volcano?" I looked at their hopeful faces, their innocent belief that love could overcome any obstacle. They had no idea that their father was getting married in 2 weeks, that he was starting a new family that didn't include them, that he'd spent 2 years documenting reasons why they were better off without him. "Would you like to see Daddy?" I asked. 3 small heads nodded enthusiastically. "Then we're going to see him very soon," I promised. "And you can tell him about everything, your robots and butterflies and volcanoes and all the amazing things you've been learning." That night, after the children were asleep, I finalized my plans. Marcus had provided me with every detail I needed about David's financial deception. Dr. Mitchell had given me professional insight into how children might react to encountering an absent parent. My investigation had revealed the extent of David's careful image management and Victoria's complete ignorance about his previous life. Now I just needed to make sure my children looked their absolute best when they met their father's new wife. I ordered 3 matching outfits from Nordstrom, elegant but child-appropriate, the kind of clothes that would photograph beautifully and leave no doubt about the children's genetic heritage. Emma's dress was navy blue with white piping, a style that would complement her dark hair and green eyes. Ethan and Evan would wear matching navy suits with white shirts, looking every inch the handsome sons of a successful attorney. I also made appointments at Chicago's best children's salon. Emma's hair would be styled in soft curls that emphasized her resemblance to David's mother. The boys would get haircuts that highlighted their strong jawlines, David's jawline, inherited and unmistakable. Most importantly, I spent hours coaching them on what to say when they saw their father. Not lies, I wouldn't traumatize my children with dishonesty. But I wanted them to be prepared, to understand that they might see Daddy at a big party, and that they should tell him all the wonderful things they'd been doing. "Remember," I told them during our practice sessions, "if you see Daddy, you can run to him and give him a big hug. You can tell him about school and your toys and how much you've missed him. Can you remember that?" "Yes, Mommy," they chorused, their excitement building with each conversation. As October 14th approached, I felt the familiar pretrial energy building inside me. Every detail had been planned, every contingency considered, every piece of evidence carefully assembled. David Pierce thought he could compartmentalize his life, erase his children from his narrative, and start fresh with his young wife. He was about to learn that some truths can't be buried, and some connections can't be severed by legal documents or willful neglect. His children were about to remind him, and everyone at his wedding reception, that biology doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. The stage was set for a reunion that would change everything. October 14th dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that wedding planners dream about. From my bedroom window, I could see Lake Michigan sparkling in the morning sunlight, the city skyline sharp against the cloudless sky. It was the perfect day for David Pierce to marry Victoria Hartwell. It was also the perfect day for his carefully constructed new life to come crashing down. I'd barely slept, my mind racing through every detail of the plan. But as I watched Emma, Ethan, and Evan eat their breakfast, Emma carefully cutting her pancakes into perfect squares, Ethan building a syrup moat around his waffle, Evan explaining the chemical reaction between baking powder and heat, I felt a calm certainty settle over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about my children getting the acknowledgement they deserved. "Are we really going to see Daddy today?" Evan asked for the 100th time, his dark eyes bright with anticipation. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to see Daddy at a big party. Will he be happy to see us? Emma asked, her question cutting straight to the heart of my own fears. I knelt down beside her chair, smoothing her dark hair. Daddy will be very surprised to see you. And when he sees how big you've grown and how smart you've become, he'll be amazed. It wasn't a lie, exactly. David would definitely be surprised. At noon, I drove to the children's salon for their final preparations. The stylist, a cheerful woman named Kate, had worked with children for 15 years and immediately understood the importance of the day. Special occasion, she asked as she began working on Emma's hair. We're seeing their father for the first time in a while, I said carefully. I want them to look their absolute best. Kate worked magic with Emma's curls, creating an elegant style that made her look like a porcelain doll. The boys' haircuts were perfect, sophisticated enough to show their breeding, young enough to emphasize their innocence. When Kate finished, all three children looked like they'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren advertisement. They're beautiful, Kate said, stepping back to admire her work. Their father is going to be so proud. If only she knew. Back at home, I helped them into their carefully chosen outfits. Emma's navy dress fit perfectly, the white piping bringing out her green eyes. The boys looked distinguished in their matching suits, their resemblance to David unmistakable now that their hair was properly styled. We look fancy, Ethan observed, admiring himself in the mirror. We look like we're going to meet a princess, Emma added, twirling in her dress. Not a princess, Evan corrected seriously. We're going to meet Daddy's new friend. Mommy said she's very pretty. I'd explained Victoria as simply as possible. Daddy had a new friend, she was very nice, and they were having a big party to celebrate their friendship. The children had accepted this explanation with the easy adaptability of 4-year-olds. More focused on the excitement of seeing their father than the complexities of adult relationships. At 3 p.m., I began getting ready myself. I'd chosen my outfit with the same strategic care as the children's, a sophisticated black cocktail dress that was elegant but not attention-seeking, paired with the pearl necklace David had given me for our first anniversary. I wanted to look successful, confident, and completely at peace with my life choices. More importantly, I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a devoted mother who had built a successful career while raising 3 beautiful children. My phone buzzed with updates from Marcus, who was monitoring social media from his office. The ceremony just ended, he texted. Victoria's Instagram stories show her looking radiant. David looks nervous, but that might just be normal groom jitters. Or it might be the subconscious awareness that his past was about to collide with his present in the most spectacular way. Possible. At 4:30, I loaded the children into my car and began the drive to the Four Seasons. They chattered excitedly in the back seat, their voices creating a soundtrack of innocence and anticipation that made my heart ache. They had no idea they were about to walk into the middle of their father's attempt to erase them from his history. Tell me again what you're going to say to Daddy, I said as we pulled into the hotel's circular drive. I'm going to show him my drawings, Emma announced. I'm going to tell him about my robot that can walk in circles, Ethan added. I'm going to explain about volcanoes and how they work with baking soda. Evan chimed in, perfect. Their enthusiasm was genuine, their excitement palpable. No one could look at these children and doubt their innocence or their love for their father. The Four Seasons lobby was bustling with wedding guests arriving for the reception. I recognized several faces from David's legal circle, partners from competing firms, judges I'd appeared before, prominent Chicago attorneys who moved in David's social sphere. A few nodded politely in my direction, probably assuming I was attending as a colleague rather than the bride's predecessor. I checked us in at the reception desk, using the names I'd registered under. The Rodriguez family, party of 4, I told the attendant, who handed me elegant name tags without question. The grand ballroom is on the 2nd floor, she said with a practiced smile. Cocktail hour is already in progress. We took the elevator up, the children practically vibrating with excitement. Through the ballroom's open doors, I could hear the murmur of conversation and the soft jazz music of the cocktail hour. 250 of Chicago's elite were celebrating David and Victoria's union, completely unaware that the evening's most important guests had just arrived. Remember, I whispered to the children as we approached the entrance, if you see Daddy, you can run to him and give him a big hug. "We remember, Mommy," they chorused. I took a deep breath and walked into the ballroom with my children. The Four Seasons had outdone themselves. The grand ballroom was transformed into an autumn wonderland, with rich burgundy and gold decorations, towering floral arrangements, and soft lighting that made everything glow. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Lake Michigan. It was elegant, expensive, and absolutely perfect, exactly the kind of wedding Victoria Hartwell had probably dreamed about since childhood. I guided the children to a table near the back, positioning ourselves where we could observe without immediately being noticed. From our vantage point, I could see the head table where David and Victoria would eventually sit, surrounded by their wedding party and immediate family. "Is Daddy here?" Emma asked, standing on her tiptoes to see over the crowd. "He's here somewhere, sweetheart. We just need to wait for the right moment." I scanned the room, taking inventory of the guests. David's parents were holding court near the bar, accepting congratulations from friends and colleagues. Victoria's family was clustered around the gift table, her mother directing the photographer with practiced efficiency. The wedding party was scattered throughout the room, bridesmaids in burgundy silk mingling with groomsmen in elegant black tuxedos, and then I saw them. David and Victoria were making their grand entrance, pausing in the doorway as the photographer captured their arrival. Victoria looked absolutely stunning in her reception dress, a cream-colored silk sheath that showed off her figure while maintaining elegance. Her blonde hair was styled in an elaborate updo, and her smile was radiant as she gazed up at her new husband. David looked handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair styled exactly the way I remembered. But there was something different about his expression, a tension around his eyes that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the spotlight. "There's Daddy," Evan exclaimed, his voice carrying across our section of the ballroom. Several nearby guests turned to look at us curiously, probably wondering who had brought children to an adults-only reception. I smiled politely and gently shushed Evan, but my heart was pounding. The moment was almost here. David and Victoria began their circuit of the room, stopping at each table to greet guests and accept congratulations. They moved with practiced grace, Victoria's charm on full display as she thanked everyone for coming. David played his role perfectly, the devoted husband introducing his beautiful wife to Chicago society. They were about 4 tables away from us when Emma spotted them. "Daddy," she called out, her clear voice cutting through the ambient conversation. A few more heads turned in our direction, and I saw David's step falter slightly. But the music and conversation were loud enough that he might have dismissed it as coincidence. 2 tables away now. Victoria was laughing at something Judge Morrison was saying, her hand resting possessively on David's arm. David was nodding politely, but I could see the way his eyes were scanning the room, searching for something that had caught his attention. 1 table away. They were close enough now that I could hear Victoria's voice, sweet and melodious as she thanked guests for their generous gifts. "That's definitely Daddy," Ethan said loudly, pointing directly at David. "He looks just like in the pictures." This time, David heard. His head turned in our direction, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on our table. For a moment, his expression was merely confused. Who had brought children to his reception? But then his gaze focused on Emma, Ethan, and Evan, and I watched the color drain from his face. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened slightly, his eyes wide with shock and something that might have been panic. Victoria was still chatting with the guests at the neighboring table, completely oblivious to her husband's distress. "Daddy, Daddy." All 3 children began calling at once, their excitement finally overflowing, and then, before I could stop them, before I would have wanted to stop them, Emma, Ethan, and Evan scrambled down from their chairs and ran toward their father. The scene unfolded in slow motion. 3 beautiful children in their elegant outfits, their faces bright with joy and love, running across the ballroom toward the man who had spent 2 years pretending they didn't exist. Nearby guests began turning to watch, smiles forming on their faces as they witnessed what appeared to be a touching family reunion. "Daddy, we missed you so much." Emma reached him first, throwing her small arms around his legs. "Daddy, I built a robot." Ethan crashed into him second, his enthusiasm infectious. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." Evan completed the trio, hugging David's other leg with all his 4-year-old strength. The ballroom began to quiet as more guests noticed the commotion. Victoria turned from her conversation, her smile faltering as she saw 3 small children clinging to her husband. Her perfectly made-up face shifted from confusion to alarm as she took in the scene. "David," she said uncertainly. "Who are these children?" David stood frozen, his face ashen, his hands hovering helplessly over his children's heads. Around them, a circle of silence was spreading as guests strained to hear what was happening. "These are Daddy's children," Emma announced proudly, looking up at Victoria with innocent curiosity. "I'm Emma, and this is Ethan and Evan. We're triplets. Are you Daddy's new friend?" Ethan asked, tilting his head to study Victoria. "Mommy said you're very pretty." She was right. Victoria's hand flew to her throat, her breathing becoming shallow. "David," she whispered, her voice barely audible. You told me you didn't have children. Daddy, why didn't you come to our birthday party?" Evan asked, his question carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "We waited for you, but you never came. Did you forget?" "We saved you cake," Emma added helpfully. "But it got old, so Mommy threw it away." The photographer, sensing drama, began snapping pictures. Guests were openly staring now, phones appearing as people began documenting the unfolding scene. David's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time, broadcast live to Chicago's social elite. I can explain," David stammered, finally finding his voice. But his explanation was directed at Victoria, not his children. Even in this moment, his priority was damage control, not the 3 small faces looking up at him with such hope. Victoria took a step backward, her face pale beneath her makeup. "You have children," she repeated, as if saying it aloud would make it less true. "You have 3 children, and you never told me." "Mommy says you live far away now," Ethan said conversationally, apparently oblivious to the tension crackling around him. "But you don't live far away. You live really close to our house. Mommy showed us pictures of when you were happy to see us," Emma added, her small hand reaching for David's. "Do you want to see my butterfly drawings? I made one. Just for you." The crowd was growing larger as words spread through the ballroom. I could see David's parents pushing through the guests, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. Victoria's mother appeared at her daughter's side, her expression murderous as she took in the scene. "David Michael Pierce," Victoria's voice rose, carrying across the silent ballroom, "you told me you had no children. You told me you'd never been married before. You told me," she never finished the sentence. The combination of shock, betrayal, and public humiliation proved too much. Victoria's eyes rolled back, her knees buckled, and she collapsed in a graceful heap of cream silk and shattered dreams. The fainting was the catalyst that transformed curiosity into chaos. Guests surged forward, some trying to help Victoria, others pulling out phones to record the spectacle. The photographer worked frantically, capturing every moment of the drama, and in the center of it all stood David Pierce, his 3 children still clinging to him, their innocent voices rising above the commotion. "Is the pretty lady okay?" Emma asked, concerned. "Why did she fall down?" Ethan wondered. "Daddy, why does everyone look scared?" Evan's question was the most perceptive of all. David finally looked down at his children, really looked at them, and for a moment, his mask slipped completely. "I saw recognition there, and something that might have been love, buried beneath layers of guilt and self-preservation, but the moment passed quickly." Victoria's mother was shouting for a doctor, David's parents had reached the scene and were demanding explanations, and hotel security was beginning to move through the crowd. The perfect wedding reception had become a perfect disaster. And we were just getting started. The ballroom erupted into controlled chaos as Victoria's mother knelt beside her unconscious daughter, frantically fanning her with a cocktail napkin while shouting for someone to call 911. Hotel staff materialized, with smelling salts and water, forming a protective circle around the fallen bride. The photographer continued snapping photos, his camera capturing every moment of the unfolding drama, but my attention remained fixed on David and our children. Emma, Ethan, and Evan were still clinging to their father, their innocent faces turned up toward him with complete trust and adoration. They had no understanding of the nuclear bomb they'd just detonated in the middle of Chicago's social event of the season. "Daddy, why is everyone yelling?" Emma asked, her small voice barely audible above the commotion. David's hands finally settled on his children's heads, an automatic paternal gesture that he seemed to make without conscious thought. For a brief moment, his expression softened as he looked down at them, really looked at them, for the first time in months. David. His mother's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Margaret Pierce was a formidable woman who had built her social standing through decades of careful networking and strategic charity work. She pushed through the crowd with the determination of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. "Mother," David began, but she cut him off with a look that could have frozen Lake Michigan. "Not here." Her voice was low and deadly. "Whatever this is, we handle it privately." But it was too late for privacy. Half the ballroom was recording the scene on their phones, and the other half was already composing texts to spread the gossip. By tomorrow morning, every society page in Chicago would be running the story of David Pierce's secret children and his bride's spectacular fainting spell. "Margaret, what is the meaning of this?" Victoria's mother, Patricia Hartwell, had abandoned her daughter's side and was advancing on the Pierce family like an avenging angel. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair didn't move despite her obvious agitation, and her diamond necklace caught the light as she gestured accusingly at David. "Patricia, please, let's discuss this calmly," Margaret began. "Calmly?" Patricia's voice rose to a pitch that could have shattered the crystal chandeliers. "Your son has just destroyed my daughter's wedding. He lied about having children. He deceived our entire family." The children looked back and forth between the angry adults, their confusion growing with each raised voice. Evan stepped closer to David, instinctively seeking protection from the frightening scene unfolding around them. "Are they mad at us, Daddy?" he asked, his dark eyes wide with concern. David's face crumpled at the innocent question. "No, buddy. They're not mad at you." It was the first thing he'd said directly to his children since they'd run to him, and the gentleness in his voice caught me off guard. Whatever else David Pierce had become, there was still a part of him that remembered being their father. "David Pierce." Judge Morrison's authoritative voice commanded immediate attention as he pushed through the crowd. "I think you owe these people an explanation." The irony wasn't lost on me. Judge Morrison, who had minimized David's parental responsibilities in our custody hearing, was now demanding accountability in front of 200 witnesses. I wondered if he remembered ruling that David's career was too demanding for regular visitation. "Harold, this is a private family matter," David started. "Nothing about this is private anymore," Judge Morrison interrupted, gesturing at the phones. "Recording everything. These children are claiming you as their father. Are you denying paternity?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. David could lie, could claim the children were confused or mistaken. But with our obvious genetic resemblance and their unshakable conviction that he was their daddy, any denial would be easily disproven. "They're my children," David said quietly, his admission sending a ripple of gasps through the crowd. "David, no." Victoria had regained consciousness and was struggling to sit up, supported by her bridesmaids. Her makeup was smeared, her elaborate hairstyle disheveled, but her voice was strong and furious. "You told me you'd never been married. You said you had no children." "Technically," David said, his lawyer instincts kicking in even in crisis, "I said I had no dependents. These children live with their mother. They're not my financial responsibility." The coldness of his response sparked another wave of outrage from the guests. Several women gasped audibly, and I heard someone mutter, "Despicable," under their breath. "Not your responsibility." I decided it was time to make my entrance. I walked calmly through the crowd, my head held high, until I stood directly across from David with our children between us. The silence that fell was immediate and complete. Everyone recognized me now, Elena Rodriguez, the family law attorney who had built her reputation fighting for children's rights. My presence at David's wedding made perfect sense to anyone who knew our history, and absolutely no sense to anyone who didn't. "Hello, David," I said pleasantly, as if we were meeting at a coffee shop instead of his wedding reception. "Congratulations on your marriage." David's face had gone from pale to gray. "Elena, what are you doing here?" "I brought your children to meet your new wife," I replied, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. I thought it was important for Victoria to know exactly what she was marrying into. Victoria struggled to her feet, leaning heavily on her maid of honor. "You're his ex-wife," she said, the pieces finally clicking together. "You're the one who's been preventing him from seeing his children." I smiled, the expression probably looking as sharp as I felt. "Actually, Victoria, I've been begging David to see his children. I've sent invitation after invitation to school. Plays, birthday parties, soccer games. David has missed every single one by choice." "That's not true." David protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my text messages. "Would you like me to read the messages I sent about Emma's art show last month? Or the voicemail I left about Ethan's first soccer goal? Or perhaps the email about Evan's science fair project that won first place?" The crowd was hanging on every word now, their attention shifting back and forth between us like spectators at a tennis match. I could see several people recording our exchange, and knew that this confrontation would be replayed across social media within hours. "Mommy." Emma tugged on my dress, her small face upturned with concern. "Why is Daddy's friend crying?" Indeed, Victoria was crying, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down her face, creating dark tracks through her foundation. Her perfect wedding day had become a public nightmare, and she was only beginning to understand the extent of David's deception. "Because she's sad, sweetheart," I said gently, kneeling down to Emma's level. "Sometimes grown-ups get sad when they learn things they didn't know before." "What didn't she know?" Ethan asked with 4-year-old directness. "She didn't know that Daddy had 3 beautiful, smart, wonderful children who love him very much," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. Victoria's sobs grew louder, her composure completely shattered. Her bridesmaids tried to comfort her, but she was beyond consolation. The fairy tale wedding she'd planned for months had turned into a public humiliation that would follow her for years. "David," Judge Morrison said sternly, "how long has it been since you've seen these children?" David looked trapped, knowing that any answer would damn him further. "It's complicated, Harold. Elena makes it difficult." "Christmas," Evan piped up helpfully. "Daddy came to see us at Christmas, but he only stayed for 10 minutes and then he had to go to work." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the crowd. "Christmas was 9 months ago. And before that?" Judge Morrison pressed. "Daddy came to our birthday party last year," Emma added. "But he forgot to bring presents and he looked at his phone a lot." "That's enough," Margaret Pierce said sharply, finally taking control of the situation. "David, take these children somewhere private. Now." But the children had no interest in going anywhere. They were finally with their father after months of wondering where he'd gone, and they had so much to tell him. "Daddy, I learned to write my name," Emma announced proudly. "EMMA. And I can write Ethan and Evan too." "I can count to 100, Ethan added. "Want to hear?" 1, 2, 3, "I know all about dinosaurs now," Evan interrupted. "Did you know T-Rex had really tiny arms but they were super strong?" Their innocent chatter provided a stark contrast to the adult drama swirling around them. Here were 3 brilliant, loving children desperate for their father's attention, while that father stood frozen in the wreckage of his carefully constructed lies. "Patricia." Margaret Pierce turned to Victoria's mother with the authority of someone accustomed to managing crises. "Perhaps we should take this conversation to a private room." "There is no conversation," Patricia replied icily. "My daughter was deceived into this marriage. She had no idea David had been married before, let alone that he had 3 children he's been neglecting." "Neglecting is a strong word," David started. "What would you call it?" Patricia's voice could have cut glass. "You've been paying for fancy dinners and expensive gifts for my daughter while your own children, when was the last time you bought them anything?" The question hung in the air unanswered because David couldn't answer it without further incriminating himself. "I sent them birthday gifts," he said weakly. "Gifts," I repeated. "Yes, you did. A robotics kit for a 4-year-old who can barely work with Legos. An art easel for a child who prefers drawing on paper. A chemistry set for a preschooler. Expensive, age-inappropriate gifts that showed you know nothing about your own children." "That's not fair, Elena." "I tried." "You tried?" My careful composure finally cracked. "You tried? David, you missed their first steps, their first words, their first day of preschool. You've missed every milestone, every achievement, every moment that mattered to them. And when they ask where their daddy is, I have to make excuses for a man who chose to pretend they don't exist. The ballroom was completely silent now except for Victoria's quiet crying and the distant sound of traffic from Michigan Avenue. 200 of Chicago's most prominent citizens were witnessing the complete destruction of David Pierce's reputation, and every moment was being documented for posterity. "Mommy, don't be mad at Daddy," Evan said suddenly, tugging on my hand. "Maybe he was just lost and couldn't find us." The innocence of his words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Several people visibly flinched, and I saw more than one woman wiping her eyes. Here was a 4-year-old child making excuses for his father's abandonment, trying to protect the man who had caused him so much confusion and pain. David's face crumpled completely at Evan's words. For a moment, the successful attorney facade fell away, and I saw the man I'd once loved, the one who had held each baby for the first time with tears in his eyes, the one who had promised to be the father he'd never had. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and I wasn't sure if he was talking to me, to the children, or to Victoria, but apologies couldn't undo 2 years of neglect, couldn't restore Victoria's trust, couldn't repair the damage to his reputation. The truth was out now, spreading through the crowd like wildfire, and there was no containing it. Judge Morrison stepped forward, his expression grave. "David, I'm going to ask you directly, are you current on your child support obligations?" The question was professional suicide. David could lie and face potential perjury charges if anyone investigated, or he could tell the truth and admit to criminal non-payment in front of witnesses. "The support amounts are based on inaccurate financial information," he said carefully. "That's not what I asked," Judge Morrison pressed. "Are you current on the court-ordered payments?" David's silence was answer enough. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. These were people who valued family, who understood parental responsibility, who had no tolerance for deadbeat fathers, especially deadbeat fathers who lived in mansions while their children struggled. "This is unacceptable," Judge Morrison declared. "David, you will be in my courtroom Monday morning for an emergency hearing on this matter." The pronouncement sent another shock wave through the gathering. A family court judge publicly ordering an emergency hearing was tantamount to declaring David an unfit parent in front of Chicago's legal community. Victoria, who had been standing in stunned silence, finally found her voice. "I want an annulment," she said clearly. "This marriage was based on fraud. He lied about everything." "Victoria, please," David reached for her, but she stepped back as if his touch would contaminate her. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice rising. "Don't ever touch me again. You're a liar and a fraud and a terrible father, and I never want to see you again." She turned on her heel and stalked toward the exit, her destroyed wedding dress trailing behind her like the remnants of her dreams. Her bridesmaids and family followed, leaving David standing alone with his children and the ruins of his reputation. The remaining guests began to disperse, the party clearly over. But before they left, many stopped to speak with me, offering support and expressing their disgust with David's behavior. Word was already spreading that Elena Rodriguez was the wronged party here, the devoted mother fighting for her children's rights. "Daddy," Emma said into the silence, "are you coming home with us now?" The question broke the last of David's composure. He knelt down and gathered all 3 children into his arms, holding them close for the first time in months. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly. "I made some very bad choices, and I have to figure out how to fix them." It was, perhaps, the most honest thing he'd said all evening. But as the empty ballroom echoed with the sounds of cleanup and whispered conversations, I knew that some choices couldn't be fixed, only lived with. The perfect wedding had become the perfect disaster, and the consequences were only beginning. The Sunday morning after the wedding, I woke to find my phone buzzing with notifications. Overnight, the story of David Pierce's spectacular wedding disaster had exploded across Chicago's social media landscape. #PierceWeddingDrama was trending on local Twitter, and the video clips were being shared faster than I could count them. I scrolled through the posts while drinking my coffee, watching my ex-husband's reputation disintegrate in real time. The Chicago Tribune's society reporter had already published a scathing piece titled, "The Wedding That Exposed a Father's Shame." Business Journal Chicago was running an editorial about corporate attorneys who neglect their family responsibilities. Even the local parenting blogs were weighing in, with many sharing their own stories of absent fathers and inadequate child support, but it was the legal community's response that would hurt David the most. Screenshots of his colleagues' posts were circulating, each one more damning than the last, disgusted by David Pierce's behavior. How can we trust an attorney who lies about his own children? Sarah Chen, managing partner at Chen & Associates, professional. Ethics begin with personal integrity. David Pierce has neither. Robert Martinez, family law specialist. Any attorney who would abandon his children while living in luxury has no place in our profession. Catherine Walsh, president of the Chicago Bar Association. The children were still asleep, exhausted from yesterday's emotional roller coaster. After we'd left the Four Seasons, they'd peppered me with questions about why everyone was upset, why Victoria was crying, and when they could see Daddy again. I'd done my best to explain in age-appropriate terms, but they were too young to understand the adult complexities of betrayal and deception. My phone rang, interrupting my social media review. The caller ID showed Marcus Chen's number. Elena, are you watching the news? His voice carried excitement and something that might have been awe. I'm seeing the social media coverage. Why? Turn on Channel 7. Now. I grabbed the remote and switched to the morning news program. The anchor was introducing a segment about Chicago's wedding scandal, and my breath caught as footage from yesterday's reception filled the screen. Someone, probably multiple someones, had provided the news station with high-quality video of the entire confrontation. I watched myself walking through the crowd, the children running to David, Victoria's fainting spell, and the explosive argument that followed. The footage was edited for maximum dramatic impact, with slow-motion shots of the children's joy and close-ups of David's stricken face. How did they get this? I asked Marcus. Wedding photographer sold it to the highest bidder. But that's not the best part. Keep watching. The news segment transitioned to an interview with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the child psychologist I'd consulted weeks earlier. She was discussing the psychological impact of parental abandonment on children, using our situation as a case study without naming names directly. When a parent voluntarily absents themselves from their children's lives while maintaining financial resources to support them, it creates profound psychological damage, Dr. Mitchell explained to the interviewer. Children internalize this abandonment as their own fault, wondering what they did wrong to make their parents stop loving them. The segment then cut to legal expert commentary about child support enforcement and parental responsibility. Attorney. After attorney weighed in, each one more critical of David's behavior than the last. This is incredible, Marcus continued. David's firm is already getting calls from clients wanting to distance themselves from him. The Hartwell family issued a statement this morning calling him a fraudulent opportunist. And get this, 3 separate law firms have reached out, offering to represent you pro bono in any future custody proceedings. I set down my coffee cup, feeling the magnitude of what we'd accomplished starting to sink in. What about the financial investigation? That's the beautiful part. All this media attention has triggered automatic reviews by the state attorney's office and the IRS. David's hidden assets are about to become very public knowledge. Before I could respond, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see a delivery driver holding an enormous floral arrangement. Behind him stood 2 more drivers with additional bouquets. "Mommy, there are flowers everywhere." Emma's voice called from upstairs as she peered out her bedroom window. I opened the door to find my front porch covered in flower deliveries, roses, lilies, orchids, arrangements of every size and color imaginable. The cards attached carried messages of support from colleagues, clients, and complete strangers who had been moved by yesterday's events. To a mother who fights for her children, you are an inspiration. Thank you for exposing the truth about David Pierce. My ex-husband is similar, and you've given me hope. Your children are lucky to have such a devoted advocate. Stay strong. While I was reading the cards, a news van pulled up across the street. Then another. Within minutes, my quiet residential block was filled with reporters, photographers, and curious neighbors drawn by the commotion. "Mommy, why are there so many people outside?" Ethan asked, pressing his nose against the living room window. "They want to talk to us about yesterday," I explained, already planning our exit strategy. The children didn't need to be subjected to media scrutiny on top of everything else they'd experienced. My phone rang again. This time it was Miranda, calling from the office even though it was Sunday morning. "Elena, I'm at the office handling calls. We've received over 200 requests for interviews since yesterday. CNN, NBC, Good Morning America, everyone wants to talk to you. Absolutely not, I said immediately. I won't exploit my children for publicity. I figured you'd say that. But there's something else. Judge Morrison's office called. He wants to see you and David in chambers tomorrow morning before the emergency hearing. He said, and I quote, "This situation has gone far enough, and it ends in my courtroom." After Miranda hung up, I gathered the children and explained that we needed to stay inside today while the reporters were outside. They accepted this with typical 4-year-old adaptability, more interested in playing with their toys than understanding the media circus surrounding our family. But as the morning progressed, the circus grew larger. More news vans arrived, along with photographers with long-lens cameras and reporters doing live broadcasts from my front lawn. My neighbors, initially supportive, began expressing concern about the disruption to their quiet street. Around noon, my doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't a delivery driver, it was David. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his face showed the strain of a sleepless night. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd spent the night dealing with the fallout from yesterday's disaster. "Elena, please. I need to talk to you." I glanced at the reporters, who had noticed his arrival and were surging toward the front porch with cameras and microphones. Whatever David wanted to discuss, it would be broadcast live across Chicago if we weren't careful. 5 minutes, I said, stepping aside to let him in. "The children are upstairs playing." David walked into the living room, his gaze taking in the modest but comfortable home I'd built for our children. His eyes lingered on their artwork covering the refrigerator, their toys neatly organized in baskets, the family photos that told the story of our life without him. "You've done well," he said quietly. "The house is beautiful." "They seem happy." "They are happy," I replied. "Most of the time. It's harder when they ask about their father." David flinched as if I'd struck him. "Elena, I know you hate me." "I don't hate you, David. I pity you. You had 3 amazing children who loved you unconditionally, and you threw that away for what? A young wife and social status?" "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said, sinking into my armchair. "When Victoria and I started seeing each other, I told myself it was just temporary. A way to feel young again. But then her family's business was in trouble, and I saw an opportunity to buy your way into old money society," I finished. "I know about the Hartwell hotels, David. I know you've been bankrolling their lifestyle while your own children go without." David's head snapped up. "They don't go without anything. They have food, shelter, clothes. They go without their father," I interrupted. "They go without birthday parties where daddy shows up. They go without bedtime stories and soccer games and science fair projects where someone cheers for them. They go without feeling like they matter to the man who helped create them." We were interrupted by the sound of small feet thundering down the stairs. All 3 children appeared in the doorway, their faces lighting up when they saw David. "Daddy." They rushed to him with the same enthusiasm they'd shown yesterday, climbing into his lap and competing for his attention. "We saw you on TV," Emma announced proudly. "Mommy said there was a big party yesterday and lots of people wanted to talk about us." "Are you staying for lunch?" Ethan asked hopefully. "Mommy makes really good grilled cheese sandwiches." "Can you see my room?" Evan added. "I have a volcano that really erupts." "Well, not really, but with baking soda it looks like it does." David's composure cracked as he held his children, his eyes filling with tears he'd been holding back since yesterday. "I missed you guys so much," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We missed you too, Daddy," Emma said simply. "Will you come to my next art show? I'm going to paint a picture of all of us together." "And my soccer game?" Ethan added. "I scored a goal last week. The goalie was really tall, but I kicked it right past him." "And will you help me with my science project?" Evan asked. "I want to make a real robot that can walk and talk and maybe even fly." David looked at each of their eager faces, seeing perhaps for the first time what he'd been missing. These weren't the abstract concepts of children that appeared on his child support calculations. They were real people with personalities, dreams, and an inexhaustible capacity for love. "I want to," he said honestly. "I want to come to all of those things. But I've made some very big mistakes, and I have to fix them first." "What kind of mistakes?" Emma asked with 4-year-old directness. David looked at me helplessly, clearly out of his depth when it came to explaining adult failures to children. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they love, I said gently. Daddy made some choices that hurt us, and now he has to work very hard to make things better. Like when I broke Ethan's robot and had to use my allowance to buy him a new one? Emma asked. Sort of like that, David said, catching on. Except the things I broke are harder to fix than a robot. We can help, Evan announced with the confidence of a child who believed everything could be solved with enough effort. We're really good at fixing things. David's smile was the first genuine expression I'd seen from him in years. I know you are, buddy. You're all really good at lots of things. We were interrupted by a knock on the door. Through the window, I could see a woman in an expensive suit flanked by 2 men in security uniforms. That's Victoria's lawyer, David said, his face paling. She said she was coming to deliver papers. I opened the door to find Amanda Whitfield, one of Chicago's most aggressive divorce attorneys, holding a thick envelope. Mr. Pierce, she said coolly, I'm serving you with annulment papers and a restraining order. You're prohibited from contacting my client or her family in any way. David accepted the papers with shaking hands. Amanda, surely we can work something out. There's nothing to work out, she interrupted. My client was defrauded into this marriage. She had no knowledge of your previous marriage or your children. The annulment will be granted on grounds of fraud and material misrepresentation. What about the business investments? The hotel properties? Amanda's smile was predatory. Those were gifts made during the courtship period. Since the marriage was obtained through fraud, any financial entanglements are null and void. Victoria will be keeping everything. I watched David's face as the implications sank in. Not only was his marriage over, but his financial empire was crumbling. The investments he'd made to buy his way into the Hartwell family would disappear along with his young wife. There's more, Amanda continued. Given the public nature of yesterday's revelation, my client is concerned about ongoing harassment. The restraining order extends to social media, phone calls, emails, and any form of contact whatsoever. After Amanda left, David sat in stunned silence while the children played around him, blissfully unaware that their father's world was disintegrating. In real time. How much? I asked quietly. What? How much did you invest in Victoria's family business? David was quiet for a long moment. Everything, he said finally. Every liquid asset, every investment account, every piece of hidden income you don't know about. I mortgaged everything on the assumption that marrying into the Hartwell family would pay dividends for decades. And now? Now I'm going to lose it all. The house, the cars, the business investments, everything except what I can't touch without triggering criminal charges. I should have felt satisfaction at his downfall, but watching him hold our children while contemplating his financial ruin, I felt only sadness for the waste of it all. Daddy, why do you look sad? Evan asked, studying David's face with scientific curiosity. Because I'm realizing how many important things I forgot about while I was thinking about unimportant things, David said, pulling Evan closer. Like what? Emma asked. David looked at each of their faces, then at me. Like how much I love you. All of you. And how sorry I am that I forgot to show it. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from David Pierce, and the first time he'd acknowledged his children's emotional needs over his own convenience. Outside, the reporters were setting up for what looked like a long siege. Tomorrow's emergency hearing would determine the next chapter of our story, but for now, we were just a family trying to figure out how to move forward from the wreckage of yesterday's revelations. The unraveling was far from over. The Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Chicago weather that matched the somber mood as David and I prepared to face Judge Morrison's emergency hearing. I'd arranged for Sophia to stay with the children, wanting to shield them from any additional courthouse drama. The Cook County Family Court building was swarming with reporters despite the early hour. News vans lined the street, and I counted at least a dozen cameras as our separate cars pulled into the parking garage. David's BMW looked oddly diminished next to the media circus, an expensive toy that seemed trivial given the magnitude of what we were facing. Inside the courthouse, the hallways buzzed with whispered conversations as attorneys and court staff recognized us. I'd worn my most professional black suit, while David appeared in what looked like the same wrinkled clothing from yesterday. The contrast wasn't lost on the observers, the composed, successful mother versus the disheveled father, whose life was imploding. Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Pierce. Judge Morrison's clerk appeared precisely at 9 a.m. The judge will see you in chambers immediately. Judge Morrison's private office was intimidating by design, dark wood paneling, legal volumes stretching to the ceiling, and diplomas and awards covering every available wall space. Behind his massive desk, Judge Morrison looked like a man who had spent the weekend reconsidering every decision he'd ever made about David Pierce. "Sit down, both of you." His tone suggested this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. "I've been a family court judge for 23 years, and I have never been so thoroughly embarrassed by my own ruling as I was on Saturday night." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Your Honor, if I could explain, you'll speak when I give you permission to speak." Judge Morrison cut him off sharply. "Right now, you're going to listen while I explain how completely you deceived this court." The judge opened a thick file on his desk. "Over the weekend, my staff conducted a comprehensive review of your case. We also received some very interesting information from the state attorney's office and the IRS regarding your financial situation." I kept my expression neutral, but internally I was celebrating. Marcus's investigation had clearly reached the right people. "Mr. Pierce, when you appeared in my courtroom 2 years ago seeking minimal custody arrangements, you presented financial documents showing an annual income of $180,000. Based on those documents, I awarded child support of $2,400 per month and granted you supervised visitation twice monthly." Judge Morrison pulled out a different set of documents. "However, forensic accounting conducted over the weekend reveals that your actual income last year was $2.3 million. Your child support payments should have been approximately $12,000 per month, not $2,400. David's face had gone completely white. "Your Honor, those calculations are based on speculative projections. Mr. Pierce, you will remain silent." Judge Morrison's voice could have frozen hellfire. "Furthermore, court records show that you are currently $14,400 behind on even the reduced support payments. You haven't made a payment in 6 months." I felt a surge of vindication mixed with anger. While David had been planning his elaborate wedding and buying into the Hartwell family business, his children had been living on my single income because he'd simply stopped paying support altogether. "But the most egregious deception," Judge Morrison continued, "was your testimony regarding your desire for increased custody. You stated under oath that you wanted more time with your children but that Ms. Rodriguez was preventing it." The judge pulled out another folder, this one thick with printed documents. "However, phone records subpoenaed this morning show that Ms. Rodriguez has called you 127 times in the past 2 years. She has sent 89 text messages requesting your presence at school events, birthday parties, soccer games, and other activities. Your response rate to these communications was 0%. David was shrinking into his chair with each revelation. "Your Honor, my work schedule." "Your work schedule apparently allowed time for weekly dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Napa Valley, and a 3-week European vacation last summer. All documented on social media by your now ex-wife." Judge Morrison stood up, his imposing figure casting a shadow across the desk. "Mr. Pierce, you committed perjury in my courtroom. You engaged in systematic fraud to avoid your parental responsibilities. You abandoned 3 children while living in luxury purchased with money that should have been supporting them." The silence stretched out painfully before the judge continued. "However, the most damning evidence isn't financial. It's the video footage from Saturday night that's been playing on every news channel in Chicago." He pressed a button on his desk, and a monitor descended from the ceiling. The screen filled with footage from the wedding reception, our children running to their father with pure joy, their innocent questions about why he never visited, their eagerness to share their accomplishments with him. "Those children love you unconditionally," Judge Morrison said as we watched Emma, Ethan, and Evan clinging to their father. "Despite your neglect, despite your absence, despite every reason you've given them to stop caring about you, they still call you Daddy with absolute trust and affection." David was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face as he watched his children on screen. "Which brings us to the question of what justice looks like in this situation," the judge continued. "The state attorney is considering criminal charges. for child support evasion and perjury. The IRS is investigating tax fraud. The Illinois State Bar Association has opened an ethics investigation that will likely result in suspension or disbarment. Each consequence hit David like a physical blow. His legal career, his financial security, his professional reputation, all of it was crumbling as the full weight of his deceptions came to light. However, Judge Morrison said, his tone shifting slightly, I'm more concerned about those 3 children than I am about punishing their father. Ms. Rodriguez, what outcome would best serve Emma, Ethan, and Evan's interests? I'd been preparing for this question for weeks, but sitting in that chamber with David's tears still fresh, the answer felt more complex than I'd anticipated. Your Honor, my children deserve a father who shows up. Not just financially, though that's important too. They deserve someone who remembers their birthdays, attends their school events, and makes them feel valued and loved. I looked directly at David. They also deserve honesty. If David wants to be their father, he needs to prove it through consistent action, not grand gestures or expensive gifts he can't afford. Judge Morrison nodded approvingly. Mr. Pierce, here are the terms of this court's new ruling. First, you will immediately pay $67,200 in back child support, the difference between what you should have been paying and what you actually paid over the past 2 years. David's eyes widened. It was money he probably didn't have anymore, given Victoria's attorney's revelations about his financial losses. Second, going forward, your child support obligation is $12,000 per month based on your actual income. These payments will be automatically deducted from any accounts or income sources we can identify. Third, your custody arrangement is changing dramatically. You will have supervised visitation every Saturday and Sunday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The supervision will be conducted by court-appointed professionals, and you will pay all associated costs. Judge Morrison leaned forward. But here's the most important part, Mr. Pierce. Your children will decide whether these visits continue. If they express discomfort, fear, or unwillingness to spend time with you, the visits will be suspended immediately. Their emotional well-being takes precedence over your parental rights. Furthermore, he continued, you will attend mandatory parenting classes, anger management counseling, and financial responsibility courses. You will also perform 200 hours of community service with organizations that support single mothers and children in need. The comprehensive nature of the ruling was staggering. David wasn't just being punished, he was being forced to confront every aspect of his failures as a father and a human being. Your Honor, David said quietly, I accept all of these terms. I want to be the father my children deserve. Judge Morrison studied him carefully. Mr. Pierce, this is your last chance. There will be no appeals, no modifications, no second opportunities. If you fail to meet any of these obligations, you will lose all parental rights permanently and face immediate criminal prosecution. As we left the courthouse, the media swarm was waiting. Reporters shouted questions about the hearing outcome, about David's financial situation, about Victoria's annulment proceedings. I pushed through the crowd without comment, but David surprised everyone by stopping at the microphone cluster. I want to make a public statement, he announced, his voice steady despite everything he'd endured. The crowd quieted, cameras focusing on his haggard face. 2 years ago, I made a choice to prioritize my career and my personal desires over my responsibility to my 3 children. I told myself they were better off without me, that my ex-wife was a better parent, that money was enough to fulfill my obligations as a father. His voice cracked slightly, but he continued. I was wrong about everything. I missed birthdays, school plays, soccer games, and countless opportunities to be the father Emma, Ethan, and Evan deserved. I chose a lifestyle funded by money that should have been supporting them. The reporters were hanging on every word, recognizing the rarity of such complete public accountability. Today, Judge Morrison gave me a chance I don't deserve, the opportunity to prove I can be the father my children need. I'm going to spend every day trying to earn their forgiveness and their love. He paused, looking directly into the main camera. To every father watching this, don't make my mistakes. Your children need you more than you need anything else in your life. Show up for them. They're worth everything. 6 months later, I was sitting in the bleachers at Lincoln Park Elementary watching Ethan score his 3rd goal of the soccer season. In the stands beside me, David cheered louder than anyone, his enthusiasm genuine and infectious. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. The first supervised visits had been awkward, with David struggling to connect with children who had grown and changed during his absence. But gradually, through consistent presence and genuine effort, he'd begun to rebuild their relationship. Emma's art show the previous month had been a revelation. She'd painted a family portrait showing all 5 of us together, David, me, and the 3 children. When asked about it, she'd explained matter-of-factly that Daddy was lost for a while, but now he's found. Evan's science fair project had been a collaboration between father and son, with David learning as much about volcanoes as he taught. Their shared excitement about discovery had created a bond that seemed to grow stronger each week. David's financial situation had stabilized after he'd sold his mansion and luxury cars to meet his support obligations. He'd moved into a modest apartment near our house, close enough for the children to walk to his place when they were older. His law license had been suspended for 2 years, but he'd found work as a paralegal at a legal aid clinic, helping other families navigate custody battles and support issues. "Mommy, did you see my goal?" Ethan ran over after the game, his face flushed with excitement and pride. "We both saw it," I said, ruffling his sweaty hair. "It was amazing. Daddy says I'm getting better at keeping my head up when I dribble." Ethan continued, looking to David for confirmation. "You're getting better at everything," David said, crouching down to Ethan's level. "I'm so proud of how hard you've been practicing." The easy interaction between them still sometimes surprised me. This version of David, patient, present, genuinely interested in his children's lives, was the man I'd hoped he could become when we first got married. "Ice cream to celebrate?" David suggested, and all 3 children cheered their approval. As we walked toward the ice cream truck, Emma slipped her hand into mine while Evan grabbed David's hand. Ethan bounced between us, recounting every detail of the game with the enthusiasm only a 4-year-old could maintain. "Elena," David said quietly as the children debated flavor choices, "thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For fighting. For them even when I wouldn't fight for them myself. For showing me what I was missing." I looked at our children, now 5 years old and thriving under the attention of 2 parents who actually showed up for them. They deserved to have both of us in their lives. "I know that now," he said. "I just wish it hadn't taken losing everything else to figure it out." The wedding reception that had destroyed David's carefully constructed facade had ultimately saved his relationship with his children. Victoria's fainting spell had become the catalyst for the most important wake-up call of his life. A year later, I received an unexpected invitation in my mailbox, elegant cardstock with familiar calligraphy. But this time, it wasn't a wedding invitation. It was an invitation to Emma's 6th birthday party, handwritten by David and featuring a drawing by Emma herself of our entire family smiling together. At the bottom, in David's careful handwriting, was a note: "Thank you for teaching me that the most important RSVP is the one you give to your children's lives." The party was perfect, not because it was expensive or elaborate, but because both of Emma's parents were there to celebrate her. David had learned to show up not just physically, but emotionally, consistently proving that his children mattered more than anything else in his world. As I watched him help Emma blow out her candles while Ethan and Evan cheered, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. David Pierce, the negligent father, was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true success is measured in bedtime stories read, soccer goals cheered, and art projects proudly displayed on refrigerator doors. The triplets had called him Daddy at his wedding reception and changed everything. Now they called him Daddy every weekend, every school event, every moment that mattered, and meant it with their whole hearts. Justice, it turned out, looked a lot like a father finally coming home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe,